What's up, everyone? How we doing? Thank you for joining the coffee talk today. I got my coffee right here. So cheers to everyone. I hope you enjoy your coffee as we discuss a little bit about unilateral and bilateral training and some of the trade-offs and benefits that I see from it. But before we do that, as I almost knock my coffee over, I just want to remind y'all, if you like this discussion, these talks, please feel free to like, subscribe, and comment below, and I'll continue making these. So this one's pretty inflammatory at times in the strength and conditioning world. It's the idea of bilateral versus unilateral exercises, and I'm just going to try and sift through some of the discussion points here that people have between them and share my opinion with it at the end. So first and foremost, people like bilateral exercises. We'll start there because they're probably the most common. And more times than not, the argument for bilateral exercise is something like a squat. And in this case, we're actually just going to make it pretty straightforward. We're going to argue a squat versus a split squat or unilateral variation. Now, it's not really single leg because it's hard to say, oh, that was only your single leg working, right? If you think about a Bulgarian split squat, you got your back foot still on the bench, but whatever. We're just going to talk about some of the pros and cons and what people argue for and against. So in the back squat, people like the back squat or back squat like variations of front squat, bilateral squats, we'll just say, because they allow for a couple of things. One, they allow for greater stability than that of a Bulgarian or a unilateral split squat. You just have a wider base. When you have a wider base, you can think about a pyramid, but your center of mass can sit in between that wider base, allowing for greater stability. And doing such, when you lift weights, you don't have much of a concern about stability, well, because you're not in this unilateral position. But on top of that, you are able to then potentially lift more weight in theory because you are more stable, at least more weight per unit of stability, right? You're not being limited by uneasiness and unbalance. Again, just an argument people have, so bear with me here. If you don't agree with them, that's okay. That's why I'm laying them out. Number two is you get to lift more weight. People think for some reason that always lifting, I shouldn't say that. That's a very biased comment on my part. People think that by, doing something bilateral lifting, we are able to lift more weight, and lifting more weight is innately beneficial, right? If we can lift more weight and we have more load on the body, that's going to cause some sort of greater systemic adaptation. And that's the argument why we like more weight. Again, whether or not that's accurate is a way to be debated, because you could also argue the same for unilateral. And then thirdly, people like the bilateral because it doesn't take as much time. Like, that's another factor people don't realize, that when we're doing these like unilateral movements, we have double. If we're doing 6 reps, we're actually doing 12 reps time-wise. The time is longer with unilateral movements, and that's probably inarguable. So on the other side of the coin, people like unilateral movements because they say there's less load per rep, which is actually a good thing, right? So one side says more load, the other side says less load because there's less compression forces when we go for lighter loads. They say sport is played on one foot, therefore we should be on one foot, which, I mean, sport's also played on 2 feet. So that argument, whatever, we'll get there when we get there. And then I think as well, people find it to be a movement that the stability itself isn't that bad of an issue, and that you can train it heavy enough. So if you have the right setup, the right, plates or dumbbells or split squat stand, whatever it might be, you can train it heavy enough without having stability be an issue, specifically the squat, bilateral squat variations. My take on it, because I just want to outline that really quick. I could probably miss a couple arguments. Put them in the discussion, by the way. If you, like Max, you totally missed this argument, can you address it in another video? Absolutely. Put that in the comments below. My take on bilateral versus unilateral. First off, I do both, okay? So I'm not going to say one is better than the other. Unfortunately, I'll tell you that right off the bat. I don't think one is superior. However, in that, I don't think they're superior. So it's not like unilateral is special. It's not like the justification, in my opinion, that because sport is played on one foot, we should do unilateral split squats or Bulgarian split squats, whatever. Sport is also played on 2 feet. Sport is played on one foot, but it's not played with one foot with your back leg up on something. It's not also played with dumbbells in your hands. So if we're going to play the sport is played like game, well, you have to play it all the way through. You can't just say sport's played on one foot, therefore we train on one foot. Well, sport's not played with a back foot on a bench, therefore we have a back foot on the bench. Doesn't make any sense. Sport's also not played on one foot when the back foot is on the ground too. If we're doing a split squat, that's a really weird position. So, the whole sport is played like sport thing doesn't make any sense to me. If you argued, I want to train a single leg stance because sport is played on one foot, comma, the movement doesn't really matter, but, comma, we're kind of working on maybe some of the hip musculature, I could maybe buy that justification a little bit more. I think a better justification if this foot is played on single leg movement aspect is actually how potentially some of the hip might rotate during a single leg movement, especially like a step up or something that's more dynamic than that of a static squat, because you have the hip rotating through. When you do that, that hip can go into extension, the other leg can go into flexion, and the way it articulates might be a little closer to that of sport itself. I guess you could argue. The other argument, say, hey, let's do bilateral because bilateral means more weight, also doesn't make any sense. Why is this the arbitrary application of weight going to make you better? If people want to argue, oh, let's do bilateral lifting because it lets you lift more weight, but then at the same time they say, but only squat to depth. Well, if I just wanted more weight, wouldn't I not squat to depth? Isn't that, if the idea is just more weight, I would just do a quarter squat. So again, we can't just play more weight is the game, because if that's the case, we'll just end up doing isometrics because that's where you can produce the most force. So we just need to be logical. I like to do some of the single leg stuff. Why? Because I actually think it puts you in a really good position to train some of your glutes in a stretch position, better than that of which maybe a squat can do. I also like the position it allows to get you in. For some athletes, getting in that deep sit back position a squat is able. They're good with it and they can sit into a squat nice and well. Some athletes don't squat very well. However, I see a lot more athletes who can do a split squat or Bulgarian split squat well, compared to those who can't squat in general very well. Plus, you can make small modifications to either, by the way, which we do here when I train, to make either one more beneficial. Like I do Hatfield variations of split squats and Hatfield variations of back squats. I do like the fact that in a split squat, you actually do reduce the compression loads. That's a very fair argument in my opinion, because I think general shear compression does tax the body quite a bit. And if we do want to train heavy, we shouldn't always, well, maybe you don't always want to do it bilaterally, just because the sheer weight being exposed to the body, the joints having to hold that weight is quite a bit. Now, if we did this Bulgarian split squat, we at least don't have the compression forces on the spine that are that high, even though you could argue the per leg compression forces and whatever load is equal. So at the end of the day, it's up to you as a coach, but you should have an educated justification for why you're doing it. And you should think critically about your justification. You can't just say something and not do it in totality. You can't say, well, sports played on single leg, therefore we lift with single legs. Well, when the movement's not even really a single leg movement and you have a bar in your back and you don't play sport with the non-horizontal inertia of the center of mass that often, and vertical displacement's not normally the main goal of a single leg movement. It's normally a continuation of a horizontal velocity. So that's kind of a silly argument. And then the other end, if just let's add more weight because it's a bilateral squat and squats are king, is also kind of a silly argument too. There are pros and cons and each of them, they have benefits and trade-offs, and we should look at the benefits and trade-offs and not innately deem one superior. That is my wrap up for my coffee. I looked over because I thought my oatmeal was going to fly away. Got a little gust of wind here. Take off. I appreciate y'all. Hope you enjoy your coffee, enjoy your day. Have a great day. I appreciate y'all listening. As always, please take care. If you guys like this stuff, comment, share, whatever. Let's help this page grow. I appreciate y'all. Breakfast crew. That's it for the day. Time to drink some coffee.